and the next thing I know, there's a girl at that end of the parking lot just screaming, "Call 911!" Call 911 at the top of her lungs.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. I'll tell you, it's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device. More features than any other shot timer. You can store all your data on the cloud for free. That's free. Native integration with Practice Score and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am once again your host, Mike Williver, and I remain your favorite former Fed. With us today, a young man who reached out with a story that he wasn't sure was a story. That's becoming a theme here lately. And we don't know if your story is good or not or worthy of a podcast until you write to me and we talk about it. So he did that. He is married with 2 kids. He lives in California, formerly a resident of Arizona. Not sure why he left. He wants to explain that. He can do that. He is in marketing. And thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So your incident is definitely one of those sort of edge cases that I think is important to talk about, strictly because avoidance of a thing. We've had more than one guest who's avoided trouble. Their hair on the back of their neck stood up a little bit and they just got out of Dodge. And I think that's a great lesson to learn and to repeat until people understand that sometimes getting the heck out of Dodge is the right answer. Before we get into that, talk to us about your personal history. I know you watch Active Self-Protection videos, and that's always good. Are you in any other way self-defense minded? Were you and are you firearms enthusiasts, martial arts, anything like that?
Yeah, so starting off, I've been watching Active Self-Protection for a couple of years. A friend linked me to the channel, and I was like, wow, this is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been watching for quite a while. And since the podcast came out, it took me a couple months to get into it, but I've watched or listened to, I think, every podcast, almost every one.
Nice.
Haven't listened to the last couple, but I will. And aside from that, yeah, I have been self-defense oriented really since I turned 18. I moved to Arizona from California, which was a wonderful decision. As soon as I got over there, I was trying to figure out how to legally get a handgun as an 18-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
That was through a private party purchase, which was great. Could not concealed carry, though. But as soon as I turned 21, I started concealed carrying without a permit, since constitutional carry was legal there. And then shortly after, I got a permit. And aside from that, over here in California, I started taking a couple classes, and I have a concealed carry permit here, so I carry daily.
So a lot of folks, I think, figure California being what it is, getting a CCW permit there is next to impossible. We've had people on the show from Cali. We've had someone on the show from San Diego County who's doing great work out there trying to get the sheriff to loosen up the CCW issuance policy. So they are getting a lot more people through that process. So can you tell us a little bit about that process? You're not in San Diego County, right? You're in Riverside County?
Yep, I'm in Riverside County.
Can you kind of walk us through that process, how hard or easy it was for you to get your CCW? And did having one previously in Arizona have any impact on that one way or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a big fan of the CCW process in Riverside County. Although it's definitely harder than Arizona and California's restrictions, it made it much more difficult than it should be. But Riverside County is very CCW friendly, and the sheriff, Chad Bianco, is awesome. So their process is probably as streamlined as it could possibly be in California. So it's just an online application. I did have to do, the good cause at the time. And that with the Bruin decision, a couple months later, that got squashed. So they ended up not using that. I had an interview with the sheriff's lieutenant, which went really well. He was super friendly, not anti 2A. So the questions were very straightforward and just verifying my good cause. From there, I had to get fingerprinted. I had to do an 8-hour class, which was online, which was great. And then within 3 months, I had my permit and just go to the sheriff's department and pick it up. And then, yeah, I definitely was sad that California does not have reciprocity with an Arizona permit, because that would have been amazing. But having an Arizona permit definitely motivated me to want to get one here. And ultimately I did. And I'm very happy I did that.
So for folks maybe who have a California CCW who would travel to Arizona for whatever reason, do you know offhand Does California recognize, excuse me, does Arizona recognize California's CCW permit? I mean, I know Arizona is constitutional carry, so you don't need anything as it should be. But do you know if that's the thing or not?
Um, I don't remember entirely. I don't think so. It's like I don't know if it's maybe like I don't know, like your California permit doesn't matter here thing. Like we don't like you.
Yeah.
No, but I'm not sure. I feel like they wouldn't, but with constitutional carry, like you just drive into the state of Arizona and it's not a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly question on second thought. I'm kind of wish I hadn't asked it. No, I look silly, but I won't
You're
edit this
good.
out. This will make the show, I promise you. My foolishness will be known to all.
You're good.
All right, so I guess the next question would be from someone who I lived in the People's Republic of Maryland for the first 22 years of my life, 23. Lived in San Diego County for 22, and now I'm in Arizona. What would possess you to be a resident of Arizona and move back to California?
Family. We had our first kiddo. He's a boy and he's 2.5 now. But we wanted him to be near family and grow up near grandparents and my wife's siblings, and then my aunts and uncles and cousins, which has been great. Being near family has definitely been amazing. And we used to do like drives from Arizona to California once a month, which is tedious with
Yep.
6 hours there, 6 hours back,
Done
and
it.
a newborn. But it's definitely been nice out here, but the 2A restrictions and the other laws are definitely leave much to be desired. And I do miss Arizona in terms of cost of living, property. It was definitely a good time. I loved Arizona.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of Californians are moving here for good or ill, whatever. It's not necessarily unfortunate, but it is driving up the cost. So everything here is becoming more and more expensive as time goes by. We made that trip a bunch of times. My wife's family lives and lived in the Phoenix area, the East Valley area. So we took that drive a bunch of times, and it's just that stretch between Casa Grande and like Gila Bend, and then Gila Bend to like El Centro is always like a little bit longer than you remember it.
Yeah,
It's just
you just lose
miserable.
yourself.
Yeah, and maybe
Gila
see
Bend
space
is
aliens out there in the desert as well if you look hard enough at night.
Yeah, Gila Bend is definitely one of my favorite places. Sarcastically, we got a nice speeding ticket there one time. We didn't realize that what is it? Maricopa County Sheriff's likes to hang out on the main road there and look for people that had the pedal to the metal on the highway for a while.
Yeah, there's a lot of speed traps there. Even the back roads kind of between.
Yep.
We're getting a little far. We're probably boring some of our audience, but some of the back roads between like Maricopa, the city of Maricopa or town of Maricopa, and Gila Bend, there's a lot of police back there with some regularity. So be warned. See, you've learned a lesson already before we even start with the story. So your incident occurred in Arizona, and to be clear, I already kind of foreshadowed that you got the heck out of Dodge, but that's not really giving anything away. Kind of walk us through who you were with and what you were doing that day, kind of what time of day it was, and just kind of give us an idea of what was going on. Where were you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was in Mesa, Arizona. I lived a few miles away, so it was like a 10-minute trip from home. And it was about 7 p.m. and I had gone myself to a pop-up taco stand where they pop up like once a week on Fridays and Saturdays across the Phoenix area. So this one was in Mesa, just in a parking lot that was pretty dead because it was already 7 p.m. So all the businesses were closed, with a line of about probably like 100 people in line. So it's a line that takes about an hour to get through to get your tacos, but well worth it. That place was delicious, and I'd been there once or twice before with no problems.
I do love tacos.
Yes, tacos are incredible, and they are quesabirria tacos, which are birria with cheese like fried onto the tortilla. It's incredible.
So real quick, I have to interject here. So if you are ever in the Southwest and you see a place that has quesabirria tacos, birria can be goat, I think. It can be beef, maybe something else, but it's like shredded meat. And if the place is any good, they will give that to you with like a side of au jus or like goodness juice to dip it in. And it's just the best thing ever. Can't recommend it enough. So moving on. So you got to the line, did you get your tacos?
No, so this is actually, I had been there maybe like 5 or 10 minutes in line, and they hadn't actually even opened or started cooking yet. So I got there at 7, and they probably like, I guess just from being in line, I projected I'd be out of there at like 8 to 8:30 because of how long the line was, and they were still taking a while to get ready. So I was still in line, maybe like, I don't know, 15 people from the very back, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. So had just gotten there. And yeah, I'd been waiting in line, and should I kind of go into what happened next?
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, I think
Cool.
the baby you're hearing is on his end, not mine for once. We do have a baby here, but she's being quiet right now. So that's not my baby. I want to emphasize that.
She is a bit talkative down there.
That's great. I
She,
love it.
yeah, so I'd been there for maybe like 15 minutes in line. Everything had been calm, just people hanging out on their phones. I was probably on my phone. At one point, I was sitting down on the curb, just chilling and waiting, knowing that, or at least knowing more environmental awareness now and parking lots being transitional spaces. I should have been a bit more vigilant because you never know what's going to happen. But and I wasn't being very environmentally aware, but I heard a very loud noise, which was tires screeching, and it was just ridiculously loud. And this like newer model, I think it was like a Lexus sedan, swung into the parking lot, maybe going like 40 miles an hour. It was like insanely fast speed turning into a parking lot. And I looked and I was like, whoa, like that's not normal. And my brain kind of told me like, no, like it's probably nothing. Someone's just driving fast. It's okay. And then I looked away. They kept speeding through the parking lot and the car was super loud. So I looked back over. They're probably going like 40 miles an hour through the parking lot.
Oh,
and
boy.
they got to the other side of the lot from where I was, which is pretty much I was just up against the street. So maybe like 50 to 100 feet away. I'm not too good with measuring feet.
That's okay.
But yeah, so he swung in and parked in front of a business across the lot, like horizontally across a couple parking spaces. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And I still like my brain was, giving me the signal like nothing's happening. This is fine. No danger. Kind of like that disbelief that anything's out of the ordinary. So I looked away, and the next thing I know, there's a girl at that end of the parking lot just screaming, "Call 911! Call 911!" at the top of her lungs. And so I looked over, and I couldn't tell what was going on. The car was relatively far away, so I couldn't see too well. I just saw that there was one or two people outside the car. That girl was like all the way down the, I guess that parking lane from me, standing next to her car,
Okay.
which is parked in a different place than that vehicle where the situation was going on.
Okay.
And so yeah, she was screaming, "Call 911! Call 911!" I looked over and I took that as a signal as I should pull out my phone, and I didn't understand what was happening, so I was hesitant to start dialing, and I was trying to figure out, and I guess trying to be a good witness at that point and seeing what's going on. A couple people ran over, and I mean, I still couldn't tell what was going on, and I was concealed carrying at the time. I had a Glock 43X on me, and I was like, well, this is definitely weird, and I just did not want to intervene, knowing that I had a gun and that can just escalate things. And it's a situation that's completely unknown to me, and I'd rather be a good witness and call 911 and let the police deal with it. So there were a couple people over there. I couldn't tell what was going on, if anyone was fighting or whatnot. And there was some yelling, and next thing I know, some of the employees from the food stand are running over there. There's probably like 5 or 6 people that worked at that food truck. And they're running over there, and the owner, I had been there before, and so I know that the owner carries a Beretta M9 on like a hip holster, I think, something like that. So I knew he was armed, and he's going over there. So I was like, oh, well, I definitely don't need to go over there and be a second person with a gun in that situation that I have no idea what's going on in. And they go over there, and next thing I know, I'm looking, there's people recording next to me. And a huge fight breaks out. The employees, they're like, before the fight breaks out, they're like having a very heated conversation. There's yelling, and next thing I know, like all those employees are hands-on on the person who was driving the vehicle, I should clarify. They were hands-on on him, and they'd thrown him to the ground, and they were essentially jumping him, like the essence of the word jumping. They were jumping the heck out of him.
Kicking the crap out of him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I could hear a girl screaming, "Stop, stop." And that went on for like 30 seconds to a minute. It felt like it was a while, but looking back at the video, it was probably shorter than that. And at that point, when I saw the assault happening, I called 911. I pretty much said what's going on, that there's people fighting. There's a guy on the ground. I can't remember if I gave the details. I don't think I had the information of what was happening before the fight started. I was just relaying that there was a fight, and there's someone being held down and kicked by the food stand employees. And trying to remember.
So real quick, at this point, you didn't know what this whole fracas was about. You just knew that people were in a giant fight.
Exactly. I still didn't know what sparked it. I just know that the dude swung into the parking lot. There was a bunch of yelling, call 911, call 911, and then they ran over, tried to intervene, and then this fight broke out.
Okay.
Yeah, and so gave the dispatcher all that info. There were probably like four or five other people that called 911 because I could hear people talking to dispatchers around me. Um, and around the same time, actually, I was still on the phone, but around that same time, while I was still on the phone with dispatch, from what I recall, they were holding the guy down, which in retrospect was a good decision, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But unfortunately, they let him go. And that guy got back in the car with another passenger that was in the car. At that point I still didn't know that who was with him and what the situation was. They got back in the car and they sped off. And after that, after they sped off, I told dispatch that they left and the direction that they were going, and I'd given them the location because I remember the cross streets. And there were no weapons drawn or anything. There was no physical dangerous violence aside from I guess the fight. But yeah, he took off. I gave dispatch the info and they hung up, and that was it. And next thing I know, maybe a couple minutes later, I mean, everything was quiet. A couple minutes later, a lone Phoenix PD cruiser pulled into the parking lot. No lights and sirens, just regular call, as if it was a regular call. And I had expected it to be, a hot call with multiple units rolling code 3 and a helicopter, just based on, the multiple 911 calls about this. But a lone unit pulls into the parking lot, strolls through, and then leaves out the other side that the suspect had left through. And they didn't stop to ask anything, and they just left.
Interesting. So, as far as you could tell, they hadn't contacted anyone, any of the witnesses, or anyone that had seen what had gone down there? Correct.
Yeah. And as well, at that point, the people who were in that fight had come back, and so people started saying what was happening. And then if you want, I can explain what I found out at that point.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So the context behind the fight is that person had pulled into the parking lot, pulled his girlfriend, what I'm assuming is his girlfriend or female companion, out of the car. And from what I was told, he pulled her out of the car and threw her to the ground and was punching her. And someone said that he was curb stomping her. I'm assuming he was just kicking her, and very, very bad domestic violence in public that people intervened in. And I know for a fact that DV is one of the most dangerous calls that police officers can respond to. So knowing that civilians jumped into a DV, an ongoing, very violent DV, and, beat the offender, definitely sparks a red flag in my mind.
So at this point, do we know if the female victim was in the car with him or if she stayed behind? Do we know?
She got back in the car with him when he hopped in the car after they let him go.
Okay. So he's now angrier than ever and milling around somewhere with his previous victim now in the car with him. What was the sort of mood with all the people that had been waiting in line? I assume everyone there realized or was kind of witnessing what happened, more or less. I know from being in crowds like that previously, when there's been something had been up like that, there tends to be a little bit of electricity in the air, a little bit of just a sort of a sense of, I don't know, like something might pop off again. Anything, did you feel that way?
I had that for sure. After he left, I had the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I had thoughts going through my mind. Absolutely. It's just weird. I had the thought, this dude's going to come back and something bad's going to happen. I legitimately was thinking that there would be some sort of retaliatory shooting, or he'd come back, because I don't know, someone like that in my mind, someone like that just wouldn't accept the fact that they just got, publicly embarrassed and beat in front of their woman that they were having a domestic violence incident with. It just definitely spooked me. I'm not sure about the other people in the crowd. I think there was a sense of holy crap, we just all witnessed the same thing, and people were talking about it with each other. And the person next to me that recorded it sent me the video, and just talking about what happened at that point. But I don't recall anyone saying I'm scared that this guy might come back. It was really just in my mind. I was this could happen, but it definitely won't, but it could, I guess, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I know the feeling, and that's very intuitive on your part. The idea that he's going to be publicly humiliated in front of the person that he was just beating, and just let that go and just leave and not come back. I'd say it's 50-50, but I wouldn't have wanted to hang out there any longer than necessary, just long enough to get my tacos. So did you get your tacos? And the audience is dying to know.
I did get my tacos. I had the thought that I should go, but I really wanted those tacos and I didn't want to disappoint my wife. So
I feel you, dude. I feel you.
I went there for tacos and I left with my tacos. And after that incident, obviously like the owner and those employees ran off. So I don't think they were making food. And then they started making food. Maybe half an hour later, I left with my tacos and went home and ate, and they were delicious.
So did you get the quesadilla? Anything else?
I got the quesadilla. I got the consomme or the au jus, the delicious juice. So good. So I got that, and I think a Jamaica drink.
Nice.
Which I don't know exactly what fruit that is. I know it's called Jamaica. It's delicious.
Yeah, it's spelled like Jamaica. It's fantastic.
Yes.
Horchata is a little too thick for me. So anyway, moving back to the topic at hand. So you leave, and at some point you come to find out that wasn't the end of it, and you were correct in your assessment that this wasn't going to end well.
Yes. So I left. I went home. I ate. My wife and my roommate. I forget where we went, but we went for a drive. We did not go back for more tacos. We were full.
Right.
We went for a drive down the road, and I was, maybe 10 minutes away from my house when I was there. So just drove around somewhere in Mesa for some reason. When we were driving home, it was probably around 9:30 or 10 p.m. And the food truck, I think I got to the food truck around 7 because I wanted to be early. So a couple hours later, I probably left at like 8 to 8:30. So a couple hours later after leaving, we're driving and my wife is on her phone. And she just said, oh my God, there was a shooting at the food truck. She said on their Instagram story, they put that they're closed and that there was a shooting. And I was like in shock. I was like, unbelievable. And the first thing that came to my mind is this dude literally left and came back and did a shooting. And I was just in disbelief.
So have we actually confirmed that's what happened, or do we know for sure that's what happened, or could it have been someone else?
So from the news articles, I don't believe, because it just lost its coverage after a while. It just wasn't like, I think it made like national news, like briefly as like a sub headline.
Right.
But even in the news reports, all from what I read recently, all that they mentioned was that there was an altercation, and it's unknown if it was linked to the shooting.
Okay. Well, after we're done here, I'm going to research that, and if I can find links to those stories, I'll put them in the description. And remember, folks, when I put that in the description of the podcast, that's going to be in the description on the audio version, not necessarily when it goes to YouTube, the extra channel. So if you don't see it, I apologize, but I will definitely look for that. So let's talk about lessons really quick. And if you have more to tell me about the incident, that's fine. We can get to that in a moment, but I'm just dying to say a couple of things. Initially, you said, something was obviously going on, but you're like, how bad can it be? And you mentioned something about, you didn't say normalcy bias, but that's what it is you were referring to.
Yes.
Where it's just like, well, I'm sure this is fine. Kind of like that meme of the cartoon character saying this is fine and everything's on fire behind him. Not quite that bad yet, but talk to me about that for a moment. Did you, if this were to happen again, would you have the same initial response, do you think?
At this point, I don't think so, being in it. Right. It's an interesting situation to imagine, because it's like, I hope that it never happens again. And absolutely, anything can happen. But I think being in this situation before and having that experience of that normalcy bias, I definitely would not ignore that feeling.
Yeah,
or the feeling that something could be wrong.
Stephanie Widener likes to say you need to, when bad things are going on, you need to radically and rapidly accept reality. And this is one of the things we're talking about. And even if it's not anything super duper crazy, doesn't have to be a drive-by in progress, but if you're out somewhere like that and there's something like that going on and a bunch of people are running over, just, if you can, just leave, just get out of there. Like, you don't need to be a part of it. I understand the pull of tacos, however, so I do get why you stayed. Yeah. You also mentioned multiple people calling the cops, and I think some may view that as being inefficient or unnecessary. I disagree. When there's something important going on, when there's a violent crime or a violent fight in progress, what more than one caller does for 911 is lead them to believe, okay, this is really happening. This is serious. I have 3 or 4 or 5 different people calling. those 3 or 4 or 5 different people might have different information about the call. They may be seeing it from a different vantage point. For example, you might have been calling and go, I don't know, there's a fight. I'm not sure what's going on. They're beating this guy up. And the next person, there's a fight. This guy was just beating his girlfriend. He knows that part of it. And the other guy may be on the other side of the fight and be able to see this guy's got a gun in the small of his back, or whatever the case may be. But more callers does tend to make for more urgency for the police. When the dispatcher says, yeah, we're getting multiple calls on this, that's a sign to step it up. But you got to remember, what you see once in a while, like this big fight and this beatdown, what you see as a normal human once or twice in your life, the cops see it every day. So don't expect their level of urgency and arousal to be the same as yours, because it's just not going to be, unless it's a rookie. He or she has seen this before and realizes that odds are it's going to be mutual combat almost always. And almost always everyone's going to part ways and dust themselves off and call it a day. The idea that someone's going to come back and shoot the place up is not, obviously, that's out of the norm, which is why it's news, if that makes any sense. One more thing I wanted to point out. You said you weren't in a hurry to run over there because you were carrying a firearm. That's the right attitude to have. I think it's important for people to realize, if you are a CCW holder or constitutional carrier or whatever the case may be, if you're carrying a firearm, that should make you, A, more polite, and B, less inclined to get involved with something. So if you're carrying a firearm and someone's road raging you, me, as someone who's carried every day for 30 plus years, my first inclination is to try to take an exit, get away from this person, and not let it even start. Stop it before it starts. So do you feel like the fact that you were carrying definitely kept you from intervening or getting closer to this than you did, like you otherwise may have, had you not been armed?
Absolutely, it kept me away from getting involved. In general, with like the experience that I have in the past, I don't think I would have gotten involved either way. I just I know to be a good witness and call 911, give the info, and just let the police deal with it.
Yeah, and for the people who intervened, I mean, God bless him for intervening. If that is in fact what was happening, he was beating his wife or girlfriend. It's called an educational beatdown. I've heard it called that before. Meaning that the guy needs to learn a lesson. And I understand that mentality completely. You see a guy beating a woman, and your instinct as a man is to make him regret his life choices. However, I think the move for them would have been to go drag him off, give him a couple licks if he needs them to get him to stop fighting, and just hang on to him, call the police, let him come deal with it, rather than this continued beatdown. Because at some point, you're going to have legal problems. If you're the one who witnessed the crime and now you're taking justice into your own hands, and I understand the level of anger involved, but you're better off if you have enough people there to detain the guy and call 911. I think that's the move. And I think you're being aware of there already being a gun near this thing, and having that be another reason why you stayed backed off and didn't want to get involved, because the last thing you want now is for there be 2 guns being pulled, and God knows where that's going to lead, but nowhere good. You know what I mean? So talk to us about any lessons you feel like you learned, or things you might have done differently had you had this to do all over again.
I think to listen to my initial, or not the initial normalcy bias thing, because that I've learned a lesson from, and I definitely will, think critically about what's happening, and believe what's happening more. But more so the feeling after that person left, where this is still not safe, right. And it still might continue to not be safe, and I should probably just leave. Say next time if something like that ever happens, I would just leave at that point and not even risk being involved in something else that could happen after.
Very good. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about and discuss about this before we part ways? I don't want to miss anything. It's kind of a short interview, but that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the interesting things with the news articles not connecting the shooting to the beatdown, I actually called a detective after the shooting had happened that same night. It had hit the news, and it said, if you have any information, call dispatch. So I called and I said I was an eyewitness, called 911, and I have a video in case the people that saw the shooting next to me didn't send in the video. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to see if I could be helpful, even though I was an eyewitness from far away. And so I let them know, and a detective actually called me back within an hour asking for the footage and saying that they're looking for that person from what I recall. But he wanted that footage, and he said he'd come by to my house and pick it up, and have me send it to him, and get a statement. But they actually never showed up, so I think they got what they needed.
Yeah, almost certainly. Yeah, I think you did exactly the right thing. Now, this isn't to say that if Micah was walking down the street and someone was beating the crap out of a innocent third party, a helpless girlfriend or wife, that he would just keep walking and call 911. That's not what we mean by not get involved. There was already plenty of people involved in this, probably too many people. So I think you staying backed off and getting out of there, of course, once the priority of tacos is taken care of, getting out of there was the right call. It was the right call. At the time this happened, were you already a watcher of active self-protection or not yet?
I believe I was, yeah.
Okay, so we saved your life, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, Miko. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Folks, I always refer to my guests as my friends, because once they've been on the show, that's what they are. So if you make it out here one of these days, let me know. We can grab a coffee or lunch or something. I'd love to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will for sure.
Mika, thanks again.
Thanks.
Alrighty, gang. That concludes our main interview. You know what time it is now. It's time for the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. Stephen, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's Super Bowl week. You got to be excited about that.
That's right. I got the Grease the Polls shirt on.
Nice.
I know people can't yet see this.
Soon enough.
But if you check out the Reload podcast this week, you will see this glorious shirt predicting the future, perhaps of my future, which is at the top of a light pole on Broad Street somewhere next Sunday.
If the Chiefs prevail, will you be able to intercept the Philadelphia Eagles world champions 2022-23 shirts before they're shipped off to a third world country?
I don't think I'm not going to worry about that. I think the Eagles have a very good chance. Mahomes is like the one reason that I would have any doubts.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of condition he's in, but I have a feeling it's going to be a very good game. I really do. I think it's going to be probably one of the better Super Bowls we've seen in a long time, because they have two really good teams, depending on Mahomes' condition. But
I hope it's more like the NFC Championship and the Eagles just win easily. But
the rest of us,
I'm sure everybody else would prefer.
The rest of us who have no dog in the fight would like an exciting game, yeah, for sure. Anywho, so this week we are talking about an article over at TheReload.com. That's TheReload.com. It's by contributing writer Jake Fogelman, and it's a poll saying that the majority of Americans oppose any new, quote, assault weapons, unquote. Those words should always be in quotes, by the way, like scare quotes. Ben, so people are not feeling, generally speaking, compared to a couple of years ago, they're not really up for any more quote unquote assault weapons bans. Talk to us about that poll, Stephen, and what it might mean.
Yeah, this is an ABC News Washington Post poll, and they've been doing this poll in one form or another since 1995. This is actually only the second time you've had a majority oppose a nationwide ban on the sale of AR-15s and AK-47s and similar rifles. Obviously, assault weapons is a nebulous term, as you just alluded to there, and the definition actually depends entirely on what state you're looking at or what bill you're looking at. And it can vary pretty substantially too. The 94 ban, for instance, the national ban was a ban that focused on obviously cosmetic features primarily, like most of these bans do, but it was, center-fired rifles that can accept a detachable magazine and have two or more of these banned features, which included things like flash suppressors, pistol grip, adjustable stock, and barrel shrouds. If any people in the audience grew up in the 90s and know what a barrel shroud is.
Right.
But, whereas a lot of the modern iterations will knock that down to one feature and use a lot of the same definition, but they'll knock it down to one feature, which actually wildly expands how many guns are affected. So Illinois did that, for instance, in their new ban. So, but you get the idea. They're targeting certain kind of gun based on how it looks. And oftentimes those are very popular firearms. The AR-15 is the most popular rifle in the country. Mm-hmm. There's an estimated 24 million in civilian hands at this point, according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is an industry group. And so perhaps that is playing a role here. in this new polling result, which has 51% of Americans opposed to an assault weapons ban and only 47% supporting it. Now, obviously, that's still a pretty even split. So it's not as though, gun owners are walking away with their gun rights advocates are walking away with a huge win. But if you look at the history of the poll, the trend is what I think really matters. And it's not just the trend across this particular poll, but we've seen the same result in a number of polls over the last year or so, where support for an assault weapons ban has been continuously dropping. And that's even though you've seen at times, for instance, in the wake of the Uvalde shooting, an increase in support for gun control generally, for stricter gun laws as a general concept. But even when that was happening, you still saw a decrease in a number of polls from major outlets like the Associated Press and Pew found, a drop in support for these sorts of policies, which is pretty fascinating.
So a couple questions. First is, do we have any idea what caused this shift? I mean, there's been quite a few. Normally when there's a mass shooting, this sort of thing has the opposite effect. And I've noticed there's been several lately. And I'm wondering if you have any opinion as to why this has dropped, especially with Uvalde being so fresh in everyone's memory.
Yeah, that's the particularly interesting thing, right? Is that generally what you see after high-profile mass shootings like Uvalde or the shootings we saw in California is an increase in support for gun control. And so we're only a couple weeks out from those California mass shootings that we just experienced. And, even still, you're seeing a drop in support instead of an increase.
Right.
And I think that's very telling. And it perhaps signals something along the lines of what you've seen with handguns, perhaps, where, handguns, it used to be actually, if you look at Gallup polling, which goes even further back than this ABC News, Washington Post sort of polling, Gallup used to ask whether, and still does ask whether, Americans would like to see handguns banned. And that used to be a pretty popular position. That was up in the 60% range back in the 1960s. But ever since then, and actually a lot of the gun control movement at the time, the gun control movement really came into its own in the 1960s. That's when you got the Gun Control Act, and the Brady Bill was later. But, that's when you started to see this organized effort to pass gun restrictions at the federal level. And they were initially handgun bans. The Brady campaign was initially called the campaign to ban handguns. And so this is pretty much forgotten today, especially if you're younger and didn't live through it. But handguns used to be a much more contentious issue. People politically, there was a lot more support for banning handguns. But as the years went on and handguns became a more popular option for self-defense for millions, tens of millions of Americans, the desire to ban them outright lessened. And then obviously you had the Supreme Court come along later in the early 2000s and outlaw, that rule unconstitutional handgun bans. And so you might be seeing the same effect here. The handgun bans today are some of the most unpopular gun control proposals. If you look at Gallup's polling, you'll see that position down in the 20%, even lower sometimes. And perhaps that's what we're seeing with this sort of assault weapons bans, AR-15 bans, as AR-15s have become much more popular and a lot of people associate them with home defense now. That may have an effect on the general support for these sorts of bans. And perhaps, it's still early to say one way or the other. These policies used to be up in the 60%, and you'll sometimes see polls that are still, obviously 47% is not an insubstantial amount of support for a policy like this, even in this poll, which is sort of further along that trend down than even some of the earlier polls I mentioned, like the AP and Pew polls, which still show usually a bare majority of support for these proposals. They're just, the trend line is down in all of them. And, perhaps if things keep up that way, if the AR-15 sort of is able to cement its status like handguns did as a tool for home defense, rather than being primarily associated with criminals or mass shooters
or military for that matter.
Yeah, or the military. Then perhaps you'll continue to see this path where they're banning them becomes less and less popular. And probably legal protections for them as well will likely help with that. If the Supreme Court does eventually rule that you can't ban AR-15s in the same way you can't ban handguns, that's another sort of thing that perhaps makes it less at top of mind for a lot of Americans. But yeah, that's my best guess is these guns have become much more popular over the last 30, 40 years from when they were initially banned in the 90s. And a lot more people own them and associate them with home defense or sports shooting or what have you. And a lot fewer people associate them with crime or mass shootings, even though they have shown up in a number of high-profile mass shootings.
Yeah, I get it's probably before your time, before a lot of our listeners' time, but anybody over 45, 50 years old will remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, especially in the Northeast, New York, Philadelphia, there was a big to-do about what was called Saturday night specials, and they were these little cheap, inexpensive, these sort of inexpensive throwaway guns, and they were kind of, I think, the media attention on that type of gun far outweighed the actual use of them in criminal behavior. I think it was just kind of a talking point, and I think that might have had a lot to do with why there was so much more support for a handgun ban back then than there is now. With that said, you've been around as long as I have as far as the 1990s assault weapons ban. Talk to us about that really quick. I think off the top of your head, you can tell us that didn't really have a huge effect on gun deaths, did it?
Right. Yeah, that's, I think, another factor at play here. That's a way that mass shootings might actually be driving some of this decrease in support, because people see that these horrific events happen even where they have these kinds of bans. So New York, California, especially just recently,
right.
They still have mass shootings, right? And so I think that has an impact on how people view these kinds of potential solutions. Like if we give up our guns and this still happens,
right.
Maybe there's no point in doing it in the first place, right? That's probably a line of thinking that factors into this drop in support. But, obviously this is just kind of speculation to some degree, but those are the sort of factors that I could see as to why you're noticing the opposite trend of what you might expect. Right. We just had some mass shootings. We just had, Colorado shooting involved in an AR variant last year, the end of last year. And yet still, you're not seeing an increase in support, at least at the national level. But it's also fascinating, too, because as the trends are moving away from this sort of regulation, from this kind of ban, you're actually seeing more political momentum for them in a number of states, and even nationally. Like the Democrats passed an assault weapons ban, the first one that they'd passed through either body of Congress since the 94 ban. And that happened last year, even in the face of this trend. We've noticed this trend we've talked about before on the show, right?
Yep.
And Democrats in the House were not put off by that. That was after Bruin, which again calls into question the legal footing of these sorts of bans in the first place. And then you saw Delaware and Illinois pass the first new statewide bans since 2000. So, we're at this very interesting moment in time where assault weapons bans, AR-15 bans, AK-47 bans are becoming less popular and are on shakier legal ground than ever. And yet they're seeing an actual resurgence in at least blue parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see how those two things sort of interact with each other as we move forward here. Those two trends.
Yeah, it's interesting. You could almost chalk it up to just the difference in the sort of almost even split down the middle politically that we have in the country right now. The last few elections have been
Mhm.
I mean, just a razor's margin between the two presidential candidates and the sort of back and forth with the Congress. Folks, for more on this, do me a favor, go over to thereload.com, thereload.com, and consider getting a membership. Stephen relies on your membership dues to fund his important work, and he's doing the Lord's work out there, bringing us the kind of stories you're not getting anywhere else, and constantly breaking new, interesting stories. Stephen, have a wonderful week, sir, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely.